The FBI's investigation moved with methodical precision. While Michael was temporarily housed in a hotel, Special Agent Larson interviewed him extensively about his history with Diane. He provided everything: HOA violation notices, security footage, witness accounts of their confrontations, and timestamps of Diane's neighborhood app posts that suspicious appeared minutes after incidents she couldn't have known about otherwise. She posted about the chemical smell 7 minutes before Marco even arrived, Michael pointed out. How could she have known unless she was involved? Agent Larson nodded, adding this to her already substantial file. We're building a comprehensive timeline, she explained, and Ms. Keller's activities are raising numerous red flags. 3 days into the investigation, the FBI traced the PCB-laden oil to CK Auto Repair, owned by Carl Keller, Diane's brother. The business operated from a weathered garage 30 miles outside town, specializing in vintage car restoration. While executing a search warrant, agents discovered an elaborate scheme to avoid waste disposal fees by illegally storing toxic materials in unmarked containers behind a false wall. Carl Keller has been collecting used transformers and industrial equipment from the 1960s. Agent Larson informed Michael during their daily briefing. The PCBs in these old systems are valuable to certain collectors restoring vintage electronics, but extremely dangerous and tightly regulated. He's been extracting and storing the oils instead of paying for proper disposal. Phone records revealed 16 calls between Diane and her brother in the 48 hours preceding the contamination, with the final call placed at 11:43 p.m., just hours before Michael's security camera captured the shadowy figure. When agents searched Diane's immaculate garage, they found the smoking gun, a small storage area behind false shelving, contained empty containers with residue matching the chemicals in Michael's pool. More damning was her journal, filled with increasingly unhinged entries about Michael's flagrant disrespect for authority and detailed plans for Operation Pool Closure. The most revealing evidence came from Diane's own security system, which she'd forgotten about in her rage. Her own cameras had recorded her loading containers into her car trunk the night before the incident, and later returning with mud on her designer gardening boots at precisely 2:43 am. She was so focused on destroying you that she forgot she was incriminating herself, Agent Larson told Michael, shaking her head in disbelief. 27 years with the Bureau, and I still can't comprehend what drives people to such extremes. The investigation took an unexpected turn when agents discovered Diane had targeted others before Michael. 3 previous neighbors in different communities had experienced property damage and mysterious accidents after disputes with her. One family had moved away after their prize-winning garden inexplicably died overnight. Another had abandoned plans for a home addition after their architectural plans disappeared from city offices. Ms. Keller has a pattern, Agent Larson explained. She establishes herself as an authority figure in communities, then systematically targets anyone who challenges that authority. But she's never escalated to environmental crimes before. At the FBI field office, Diane maintained her composure through hours of questioning, insisting she was being framed. She cited her spotless reputation, community service awards, and position on the HOA board as evidence of her character. Her facade finally cracked when agents played a recording from her brother Carl, who had accepted a plea deal in exchange for his testimony. The recording detailed how Diane had called him requesting something that would teach that pool-loving environmentalist a lesson, and how he had provided her with containers of waste oil without realizing she would actually use them. It was supposed to be a joke. Carl's voice insisted on the recording. I told her it was toxic, but I never thought she'd actually pour it in someone's pool. She just wanted to scare him, show him she had power over him. When the recording ended, Diane's composure finally shattered. She pounded the table with manicured fists, her face contorted with rage. He made me look incompetent in front of everyone, she screamed. I built my reputation in this community. I am respected. He needed to learn his place. Agent Larson watched impassively as Diane continued her tirade, the recording device capturing every self-incriminating word. Do you understand the criminal charges you're facing, Miss Keller? She finally interrupted. Federal environmental crimes carry substantial penalties. This isn't about HOA violations anymore. Inspector Rivera didn't just take samples. She immediately cordoned off Michael's entire property with yellow hazard tape and made several urgent phone calls. Her face grew increasingly grave with each test she performed, and by early afternoon, 3 additional county vehicles had arrived. "Mr. Stevens, these initial readings are extremely concerning," she explained, showing him a digital meter with numbers that meant nothing to him, but clearly alarmed her. "This isn't just motor oil or some common chemical. We're detecting polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, at levels that trigger federal notification protocols." "PCBs?" Michael asked. "Aren't those banned?" Since the 1970s, Rivera confirmed, they're carcinogenic and persistent in the environment. Someone had to work very hard to get their hands on this stuff. She lowered her voice. "This isn't a prank, Mr. Stevens. This is a serious environmental crime." Within hours, officials in white protective gear were digging test holes throughout his yard and installing groundwater monitoring wells along the property line. News of the situation spread through Oakwood Estates like wildfire, with residents gathering at the perimeter of Michael's property in growing numbers. Dave organized an emergency HOA meeting in his garage, where county officials attempted to calm the panicking homeowners. "These PCB levels are among the highest I've ever recorded in a residential area," the lead inspector explained to the packed garage. "We're looking at a Superfund-level contaminant in a suburban backyard. This isn't just about Mr. Stevens' pool anymore. We need to test the surrounding properties and groundwater immediately." Diane stood at the back, arms crossed. "I told everyone his pool modifications were dangerous," she announced loudly. "Now our children are at risk because proper protocols weren't followed." Michael, who'd been quietly conferring with Rivera, turned to face her. "The county has confirmed this is deliberate contamination, Diane. This wasn't an accident or a malfunction." Before Diane could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Rebecca Wilson rushed in, her face pale with fear. "Ethan's in the emergency room," she announced, referring to her 6-year-old son. "He was playing near the drainage ditch behind our houses, and now he's complaining of headaches and nausea, symptoms the doctor says are consistent with PCB exposure." The room erupted in panic. Parents grabbed their phones to check on children. Property owners began frantically calculating plummeting home values. Mrs. Abernathy fainted and had to be helped to a chair. "Everyone please," Rivera called over the chaos. "We need to conduct this evacuation in an orderly." "Evacuation," someone shouted. "As a precaution," Rivera clarified. "Until we determine the full extent of contamination, houses within a 300-foot radius of the affected area should be temporarily vacated." The situation escalated when local news vans began arriving, reporters eager to cover what they were calling a suburban environmental disaster. Residents who had been friendly neighbors for years now looked at Michael with suspicion and fear, despite Rivera's repeated explanations that he was a victim, not the cause. By evening, the quiet streets of Oakwood Estates resembled a hazardous materials operation site. Floodlights illuminated Michael's property as environmental teams worked through the night. Families packed overnight bags, arranging temporary accommodations with relatives or at the Holiday Inn that had offered special rates for Oakwood evacuees. Michael sat on the curb across from his contaminated home, watching the activity with numb disbelief. His phone had been confiscated as evidence after he'd shown Rivera the security footage. The community he'd been part of for 7 years had unraveled in less than 12 hours. "Mr. Stevens?" Michael looked up to see a stern-faced woman flanked by 2 men in dark suits, all wearing FBI windbreakers. She'd flashed her credentials. "Special Agent Larson, FBI Environmental Crimes Unit. We need to talk about what happened to your property." Her gaze drifted to Diane, who was giving a dramatic interview to a local reporter across the street. "And about your neighbor with the interesting gardening gloves." Agent Larson surveyed the scene with cold fury. "Someone knew exactly what they were doing," she said. "This wasn't petty vandalism. This was a calculated environmental assault, and we take that very seriously." As if on cue, Diane concluded her interview and noticed the FBI agents. For the first time since Michael had known her, her composure faltered. She abruptly ended the interview and retreated toward her home, only to find another agent standing at her door with a document in hand. "Ms. Keller, we have some questions about your brother's auto repair business, and we have a warrant to search your premises." The courthouse was packed for Diane's sentencing hearing 3 months later. Residents of Oakwood Estates filled the benches, along with environmental activists, reporters, and curious locals drawn by the sensational headlines. Michael sat in the front row beside Dave and Mrs. Abernathy, who had brought her famous lemon bars for strength. Diane appeared dramatically transformed from the polished HOA enforcer everyone remembered. Her salon-perfect hair had grown out, revealing inch-long dark roots. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced by a modest navy suit that hung loosely on her frame. The only remnant of her former self was her rigid posture as she faced the judge. Judge Eleanor Ramirez, a former environmental lawyer with 20 years on the bench, listened stone-faced to the prosecution's case, detailing the calculated nature of the crime, the environmental damage, and the community impact. The defendant's actions weren't merely vandalism or property damage, the prosecutor concluded. They represent one of the most deliberate acts of environmental terrorism this county has ever seen. The fact that it stemmed from a petty neighborhood dispute makes it all the more disturbing. Diane's attorney emphasized her previously clean record and community involvement, suggesting the incident was an unfortunate lapse in judgment during a period of extreme stress. When given the opportunity to speak, Diane offered a carefully worded apology that blamed her brother for providing the chemicals while acknowledging she had, perhaps, overreacted to perceived slights. Judge Ramirez removed her glasses, fixing Diane with a penetrating stare. "This court cannot recall a more egregious abuse of power or a more callous disregard for both property and environmental welfare," she declared. "You weaponized toxic chemicals to settle a personal score, endangering not just your target, but an entire community's soil and groundwater. The premeditation involved is particularly disturbing." The sentence came swiftly, a $275,000 fine to fund environmental restoration, 5 years of probation, and 2,000 hours of community service, specifically on environmental cleanup projects. Additionally, Diane was prohibited from serving on any community board or homeowners association for life. "The environment is not your personal weapon, Ms. Keller," Judge Ramirez concluded, "and this sentence reflects the seriousness with which this court views your actions." As spring arrived in Oakwood Estates, Michael's property underwent a remarkable transformation. What began as an EPA-mandated cleanup evolved into something unexpected. Neighbors who had previously only exchanged polite nods were now working side by side on weekends, replanting native species in the newly remediated soil. The county environmental office provided guidance, turning the disaster into an opportunity for community education. "We're thinking of calling it the Phoenix Project," Dave explained as he helped Michael install a rainwater collection system, rising from the toxic ashes and all that. The remediation of Michael's property became something of a neighborhood renaissance. Children planted butterfly gardens under the supervision of Mrs. Abernathy, who had discovered a passion for native pollinators. Rebecca Wilson, whose son had fortunately tested negative for PCB exposure, organized a community workshop on water conservation. The HOA board, now led by Dave, revised their guidelines to prioritize environmental sustainability over aesthetic uniformity. The most unexpected development came 6 months later when Carl Keller, now operating a legitimate waste management company after serving his own reduced sentence, approached Michael with a proposal. Together, they established a neighborhood environmental education program, turning Michael's property into a case study of environmental recovery and responsible stewardship. "It's ironic," Carl admitted during their first planning meeting. "If Diane hadn't tried to destroy your pool, none of this would have happened. Sometimes the worst actions create the best opportunities." At the first community swim of the season, Michael watched as children played in the sparkling water of his new pool, designed with cutting-edge environmental features funded partly by Diane's fine. The water gleamed azure under the summer sun, surrounded by native wildflowers that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. Dave approached, offering Michael a craft beer from the local brewery. "You know what's ironic?" he said, echoing Carl's earlier sentiment. "Diane was so obsessed with property values, but they've actually gone up since this whole mess. Turns out, people value good neighbors and community spirit more than perfect grass height." As the summer sun set over Oakwood Estates, Michael raised his glass in a toast to neighbors. Michael Stevens had created a backyard oasis in Oakwood Estates, complete with a custom pool that had become the envy of the neighborhood. After purchasing the modest 3-bedroom ranch 7 years ago, he'd poured his heart and savings into transforming the barren backyard into something special. The azure waters of his kidney-shaped pool reflected the Colorado sky, surrounded by carefully selected native plants that required minimal watering, a point of pride for the environmental engineer. His weekend gatherings, tasteful affairs with close friends, good music, and excellent barbecue had become something of a local tradition. Neighbors would stop by with side dishes or drinks, children would splash in the shallow end under watchful eyes, and even Mrs. Abernathy, the 82-year-old retired school teacher from across the street, occasionally dipped her feet in while sipping lemonade. The HOA had even featured his backyard in the community newsletter as an example of tasteful outdoor living. That all changed the day Diane Keller's moving truck pulled into the driveway next door. Diane arrived like a hurricane in pearl earrings. Within 48 hours, she'd introduced herself to everyone on the block, compiled a list of community concerns, and somehow secured an emergency appointment to the HOA board. Her Tudor-style home, identical in blueprint to every other house on the street, was quickly distinguished by a lawn that appeared to have been trimmed with nail scissors and window boxes containing perfectly symmetrical arrangements of petunias. Michael first encountered her not with a welcome basket, but with a ruler in hand, measuring his grass at 7:30 am on a Saturday. "You're 0.7 inches over regulation height," she informed him, clipboard already filled with notes. Her platinum blonde bob didn't move an inch in the morning breeze. "And your pool pump creates exactly 48 decibels of noise. The limit is 45. Michael, coffee mug in hand, and still in his pajama bottoms, blinked in confusion. "Good morning to you too. I'm Michael, your new neighbor." He extended his hand, which Diane regarded with the enthusiasm of someone being offered a dead fish. "I know who you are, Mr. Stevens. Your file is quite thick already." She snapped her ruler closed. "You'll receive formal notice about these violations by Monday. I suggest immediate compliance." Over the next 3 weeks, Michael received 7 official notices from the HOA, all bearing Diane's aggressive signature with its knife-like K. His trash cans had been visible from the street for 6 hours and 12 minutes, exceeding the 5-hour limit. The potted plants on his front porch was 0.3 inches taller than regulations permitted. His pool maintenance company had arrived at 8:52 am when contractor hours officially began at 9 o'clock. Michael's attempts at neighborly diplomacy, invitations to his gatherings, offers to adjust his pool maintenance schedule, were met with thinly veiled contempt. When he dropped off a peace offering of homemade banana bread, he later found it in his own trash can with a note that read, "No unauthorized food deliveries." HOA Regulation 7.2. The situation reached its first breaking point when Michael installed eco-friendly solar heating panels for his pool. The sleek black panels, barely visible from ground level, extended the swimming season by 2 months while reducing his energy costs. He'd secured proper approval from the HOA president, a reasonable man named Dave who appreciated Michael's environmentally conscious approach. 3 days after installation, Diane appeared at his door with 3 other board members in tow, brandishing a folder of regulations. "These monstrosities are in direct violation of aesthetic guidelines," she declared, pointing accusingly at the roof. "They must be removed within 48 hours, or you'll face daily fines." Michael, prepared for this confrontation, calmly retrieved his approved application. "Actually, I have written approval right here, signed by Dave last month. Everything was done according to guidelines." The other board members examined the paperwork, nodding in acknowledgement. Diane's face flushed crimson as she snatched the document, scanning it for any technicality she could exploit. Finding none, she thrust it back at Michael, her perfectly manicured finger jabbed into his chest. "This isn't over," she hissed, loud enough for the other board members to hear. "Nobody makes me look foolish. Nobody." As the impromptu delegation retreated across his lawn, Diane taking care to step directly on a sprinkler head, Michael couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. He'd dealt with difficult neighbors before, but something in Diane's eyes suggested this was more than typical HOA zealotry. This was personal, and it was just beginning. The morning after winning his neighborhood's annual cannonball contest, Michael stepped onto his patio to admire his pool in the morning light. The previous day had been perfect. 30 neighbors gathered for a proper end-of-summer celebration, with Dave, the HOA president, presenting Michael a joke trophy for most impressive splash. Even Mrs. Abernathy had joined the judging panel, giving Michael a perfect 10, while Diane watched sorely from behind her privacy fence. Now, at 7:03 a.m. on Sunday, Michael froze in horror. The crystal blue water he meticulously maintained now resembled a toxic swamp, an iridescent rainbow of black and green sludge pulsating with each ripple. The stench hit him seconds later, acrid, chemical, burning his nostrils and eyes. "What the hell?" he murmured, approaching cautiously. The decorative stones surrounding the pool's edge were stained with dark splatter marks, like something had been hurled or poured from a height. A dead cardinal lay near the pool steps, its feathers matted with oily residue. Michael pulled his shirt over his nose and backed away, already dialing his pool maintenance company's emergency line. While waiting for a callback, he reviewed his security footage, a habit he'd developed since Diane's arrival. His camera had captured something unusual at 2:17 a.m. A shadowy figure by his fence line, the gleam of metal containers, and a deliberate pouring motion. Though the face wasn't clear, the distinctive floral gardening gloves were identical to the ones Diane wore while pruning her immaculate roses. Gloves she'd smugly shown off at the last HOA meeting while lecturing about proper horticultural etiquette. By 10 a.m., Marco from Clearwater Pool Services arrived, his usual cheerful demeanor vanishing the moment he rounded the corner of Michael's house. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," he whispered, placing his test kit on the ground and backing away. "Don't get any closer, man. That's not normal pool contamination." Marco's usual professional demeanor cracked as he took preliminary samples using an extended pole. 15 years in this business, and I've never seen anything like this," he said. "This isn't an accident. This is vandalism, possibly criminal. And whatever's in there," he pointed to where the pool lining was already beginning to bubble and warp. "It's eating through commercial-grade materials designed to withstand harsh chemicals." "Can you clean it?" Michael asked, already knowing the answer. Marco shook his head. "This needs hazmat specialists, not pool guys. I'm calling my cousin at the county environmental office. This stuff could be leaching into the groundwater." As Michael processed this information, his phone buzzed with a neighborhood app notification. Diane had posted a community alert about strange chemical smells coming from Michael's property, suggesting his unauthorized pool modifications might be to blame. The post had already gathered 15 comments, with neighbors expressing concern about their children's safety. At 11:32 a.m., precisely when church services ended, Diane emerged from her house with a small group of neighbors in tow. She wore a pristine white dress with a sun hat, looking like she'd stepped out of a 1950s garden party rather than Sunday worship. "We're forming a neighborhood health committee," she announced loudly from the sidewalk, clearly performing for her audience. "Given the dangerous situation that's developed, we need to protect our community." Michael, still waiting for the environmental inspector, walked to his property line. "Diane, did you have anything to do with this?" he asked quietly, watching her face. For just a moment, something flickered in her eyes, satisfaction, perhaps even triumph, before she arranged her features into a mask of outrage. "How dare you accuse me of anything? I'm not the one with a poisonous cesspool in my backyard." She turned dramatically to her assembled neighbors. "You see, he's trying to blame me for his own negligence." Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Dave. "Just saw Diane's post. What's happening? Need help? Before he could respond, a county vehicle pulled into his driveway. A woman in a county environmental protection uniform emerged, equipment in hand. "Mr. Stevens, I'm Inspector Rivera. We received an urgent call about a potential hazardous waste situation." She glanced at the gathering crowd, then back at Michael. This might become a much bigger issue than just a damaged pool. As if to emphasize her point, the wind shifted, carrying the chemical stench toward the assembled neighbors. Several covered their mouths and backed away. Diane, however, seemed unperturbed by the smell, as though she'd been expecting it. Michael pointed to his security camera. "I think I may have evidence of who did this," he said quietly to the inspector. "And it's definitely not an accident."